The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR Network, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Rachel Martin. You probably know how interview podcasts with famous people usually go. There's a host, a guest, and a light Q&A. But on Wildcard, we have ripped up the typical script. It's a new podcast from NPR where I invite actors, artists, and comedians to play a game using a special deck of cards to talk about some of life's biggest questions. Listen to Wildcard wherever you get your podcasts, only from NPR.
1 year ago, the 40-year-old sakura trees on Pike Street were unceremoniously chopped down on a Tuesday afternoon. It was part of a planned redesign of a busy streetscape that hadn't quite made headline news. But the trees were iconic. People were attached to them. Community members had tried to save them, attaching heart-shaped signs to the trees and writing to city council members. These cherry trees were culturally significant to the city. They were first planted in the 1980s to commemorate the presence of Japanese American farmers who once played a large role at Pike Place Market. In response to the public outcry, the city replaced the older sakuras with new ones. But replacement trees don't have the same significance as trees that have survived in the city for decades. Survivor trees have evolved to live where they were never meant to be. They endure with their resilience, thriving against all odds. Like the Japanese plum tree planted in the front yard of the Engs family home in the Chinatown-International district. The Engs cared and tended to their Loquat Tree for nearly 6 decades. It was sprouted from a fruit that originally came from China, its lifespan extending far longer than the average loquats. The tree has become an iconic landmark of the neighborhood, a symbol of nature within a gritty urban landscape populated by scraggly, malnourished ones. But more importantly, the Loquat Tree of the CID stands as an artifact of a first-generation pioneer immigrant and his family, its fruit providing nourishment to them and the surrounding community.
Every year when the loquat fruits were ripe, we would all have loquat fruit during the summer.
The seeds of this tree have been propagated all over the city, arboreal descendants forming their own non-human diaspora, just as the family who tended to it grew and prospered and scattered. The history of the Engs family and their fertile, one-of-a-kind loquat tree are forever intertwined. This is 10,000 Things, a podcast about modern-day artifacts of Asian American life and the stories they reveal. I'm Shin-Yi Pai. Today, a tree. Gazing out from the Engs homestead.
I'm Rachel Martin. You probably know how interview podcasts with famous people usually go. There's a host, a guest, and a light Q&A. But on Wildcard, we have ripped up the typical script. It's a new podcast from NPR where I invite actors, artists, and comedians to play a game using a special deck of cards to talk about some of life's biggest questions. Listen to Wildcard wherever you get your podcasts, only from NPR.
On South 8th Avenue, you get a prime view of I-5, the highway that cut the CID neighborhood in two. But look upwards and you'll lose yourself in the glossy, dark green leaves of a mature loquat tree. At 90 years old, Tuck Eng is the family patriarch of the Eng family. Neighbors call him Uncle Tuck, out of respect. He was born in the CID, in an apartment on Canton Alley.
Everybody knew everybody, and everybody was friendly to each other, and it was just a nice place to grow up in.
Tuck's father emigrated from the Toisan region of southern China, a place where loquat fruit is grown in the cooler hill regions. In Seattle, he liked to buy imported loquat fruit when they showed up in the local markets during the summer. The fruit was a taste of home, best grown in mild climates in full sun. The golden yellow fruit is about the same size as an apricot, but oblong and oval-shaped like a grape, with a thick skin that is often peeled or chewed and spit out. Each fruit has small brown seeds at the center.
One year, for no reason at all, he decided to put a couple of seeds in the water, and it sprouted a little root.
Tuck's dad wanted to know whether it was possible to grow a loquat tree from a seed, so he planted the seedling in a tin coffee can.
He was just curious to see if he could get fruit.
Mm-hmm.
He was that kind of a guy. He would water it in the winter, and in the summer he would take it out in the sunshine.
With time, water, and care, the seedling thrived, and 2 years later, it produced a little tree. In 1961, Tuck's father planted that tree in the front yard of their family home at 8th and Weller. In her book, How to Do Nothing, artist Jenny Odell writes about the idea of survivor trees that resist urban development and may be of questionable worth. They may be perceived as difficult, artifacts of nature that we humans don't entirely know what to do with. The loquat is a traditional evergreen shrub, a tropical tree that is uncommon to a place like Seattle. Its very presence here is an anomaly. Its ability to take root and adapt to hostile conditions parallels the strength and resilience of Chinese immigrants who traveled across the seas to establish themselves here in a new country.
The blossoms of the fruit can withstand 27 degrees Fahrenheit and won't freeze. And this tropical tree evidently doesn't know where it is because it starts blooming in September, October, November. And the flowers would be exposed to cold weather if it occurs.
For nearly a decade, the Engs loquat tree refused to bear fruit. The plum has deep symbolic value in East Asian literature as a symbol of resilience and perseverance. In fact, it's widely known as one of the 3 friends of winter, along with bamboo and pine. The Eng family tended their loquat tree with great patience. At one point, they even planted a second loquat on the property, hoping that an additional tree would encourage their original seedling to yield fruit. After 10 years passed, the tree that Tuck's father started with as just a seedling finally gave its first harvest.
He was amazed that it had fruit.
The Engs family relationship to land and growing food extends beyond the loquat tree. Tuck remembers how his parents would use every last inch of their property as a resource.
In the spring, he would go and buy a whole bunch of chicks, little chicks, and we would raise them, and that'd be our food as they grow up. And then we have the veggie garden with all kinds of vegetables, bok choy and gailan and all the Chinese vegetables. My parents were very resourceful.
The tree itself is a monument to the family's resourcefulness. It exists because they were able to circumvent the city's racist housing policies to plant it in the first place. When Tuck was young, his family of 6 lived in an apartment with minimal amenities. The apartment was warmed by a pot-bellied stove, and young Tuck slept in a dresser drawer. They outgrew several apartment homes and needed to expand beyond their existing space by the time Tuck was 5.
My dad came home one day and said, "I found a place in Chinatown, so don't worry, we can move." So that evening, Mom went to that apartment that my dad put down payment on, and she walked in and walked around, and she says, I don't want to live here. It's spooked. So my dad lost $50 down payment.
They continued living in their cramped quarters while expanding their search for a better apartment, but Tuck's mom wanted more stability.
My mom just said to my dad, "I like Chinatown. I only speak Chinese. I don't want to drive now. So find me a place and build me a house in Chinatown."
So Tuck's father went looking to buy a plot of land where he could build a home, and he found a white builder who was willing to construct it. He secured loans from a number of family and friends, including $500 from his builder, and was ready to purchase a small piece of property on South 8th Street. But at that time, racial covenants prevented Chinese immigrants from being able to own property. So Tuck's father created a loophole. He registered the property in the name of his son, who had been born a U.S. citizen.
He wrote my 8-year-old brother's name as the legal owner. He was an 8-year-old that can own land, and that's how they bought the land.
Getting the house built was a whole other ordeal. Originally, the 3-bedroom home was designed as a typical wooden frame-style house at a cost of $2,500 to build. But as construction began, the city imposed new obstacles.
The city came down. He said, we just had a new ordinance. The west side of 8th Avenue is zoned commercial now. Therefore, no frame houses, no frame building.
Establishing a home required Tuck's dad to be both innovative and vigilant. Instead of abandoning the project, he asked his builder to come up with a design solution that would allow the building of a house on a street that prohibited traditional homes made from the popular materials of the time. So the builder ingeniously adapted his design. He would build the house out of cinder blocks, a material not often used for homes. The family dodged another barrier to owning a permanent home, but it came at a higher cost. The cinder block house cost $3,500. Constructing the house would take a year, and the building materials were an easy target for thieves.
So when the materials start coming in, my dad had to park his 34 Ford there and stay there at night with his 45 automatic pistol. So he guarded the material until it was done.
Once the Eng family finally moved into their new house, it began to sink in how their whole way of life would change. They had access to new technologies that would bring comfort and ease to their everyday lives, transforming the way that they had lived and maintained a household.
And when we moved in, Mom walked around and she saw this thing on the wall. She said, Dad, what's that thing on the wall? And my dad said, that's a thermostat. I said, what's it for? It controls the heat to the whole house. And she says, oh, good. I'm always cold. Set it to where I'll be warm. So he set it at 70, and the thermostat was never changed from that day on. Then Mom's life totally changed. She threw away her washboard. She started washing in her Westinghouse washing machine with a spin dryer, and she started cooking in the electric range.
The family gleaned and foraged for watercress, cabbage sprouts, and seaweed to help make extra money to offset the loans they had to take out to build their house. A neighbor taught them how to cultivate bean sprouts, and they launched a bean sprout factory out of their basement, selling homegrown vegetables to neighbors and restaurants in the CID. Having a home place to settle and live comfortably allowed the family to put down roots, and the Loquat Tree was born. In its 60-plus years of existence, the Engs Loquat Tree has grown taller than their house and has extended past the power line. It towers above the sidewalk, providing shade to pedestrians in an otherwise barren hardscape. The tree has fed the family, and it has fed the community. Every year, people in the neighborhood watch closely when the tree's fruit transitions from a pale yellow-green to a deeper golden orange. It can produce more fruit than people can pick. In order to pick the tree's fruit when it's in season, wayward neighbors get creative.
They would climb on top of a car roof and pick the fruit because they couldn't reach it.
Last year, there was a neighborhood harvesting party organized by the Wing Luke Museum. Witnessing people pick the fruit made more people turn up. Some folks climbed on the roof of the house to better access the tree. Horticulturists have collected grafts from the Engs Loquat Tree, and a local nursery has distributed dozens of seedlings grown from it. Tuck himself tried propagating a tree from the seed of the fruit.
I took one of these seeds and did the same thing my dad did.
After a year, Tuck had a seedling that's now planted in his own yard. Last year, it finally bore fruit. 2 whole loquats.
I put a vinyl cover over it because it froze last year, and my tree already have blossoms. So hopefully I'll get more than 2 fruit next year.
Tuck moved out of the family homestead to build his own adult life, but the family kept the property, house intact. Recently, Tuck bequeathed it to the Wing Luke Museum, an Asian American cultural museum that is also a neighborhood institution and community anchor. The museum will preserve the Eng home as a historic property, but they also decided to care for and steward the loquat as a legacy tree. They are looking forward to continuing to share the tree's harvest with neighboring restaurants and residents. Turning back to Jenny Odell's arboreal musings and how to do nothing. A tree is a sentinel of time, a wordless testament to the living world and our cultural past. Trees are a monument to history. Trees bear witness to waves of settlement, immigration, redlining, and development, while maintaining the same unchanging perspective. And they exist in the public domain. It's perhaps for these very reasons that Seattleites fought to save Luma, the giant western cedar tree that made headline news in 2023 when a tree sitter climbed its branches and hung out for days, while members of the Snoqualmie tribe rallied successfully to save it from being cut down by developers. The growth of our city is pitted against trees. Do we remove them to make room for new development? It's an impossible choice. What trees can remind us of is how each of us carries our own cycles of time, through our DNA and through our experiences. And it's this embodied time that overlays with more conventional notions of real time to show that the lone individual can endure, far beyond what others would imagine for us. Just like Tuck Eng and the Loquat Tree that's still thriving in his family's front yard. Next week's object is the East Gongyik Building. 10,000 Things is produced by KUOW in Seattle, a member of the NPR network. Our host, writer, and creator is me, Shin-Yi Pai. Whitney Henry Lester produced this episode. Jim Gates is our editor. The show art is designed by Eason Yang. Original music is by Tomo Nakayama. Our production team includes Michaela Giannotti-Boyle, Hans Tweit, Amelia Peacock, Brendan Sweeney, and Marshall Eisen. If you like this podcast, KUOW has a lot more great audio for you. Search KUOW in your podcast app and see what piques your interest. KUOW podcasts are made possible through community funding. You can support 10,000 Things and other KUOW podcasts by making a donation of any size at KUOW.org. There's a link in the show notes. And as always, thanks for listening.
Hey, my name's Claire McGrain, and I'm a producer for Seattle Now, KUOW's local news podcast. There is a lot happening in our region, and it's a lot of work to keep track of it all. We'll get you caught up on the latest news and take a deep dive into something happening around the city, all in under 15 minutes. Get a morning walk in or grab a cup of coffee and start your day with us. Learn something new and connect with our city by searching for Seattle Now wherever you get your podcasts.